The air was thick, not with smoke, but with tension. CNN studio gleamed under the floodlights, but no one noticed the polished floor or the cold steel of the cameras. All eyes were fixed on two figures seated center stage, two faces of America's crossroads. On the left sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the storm from the Bronx hair pulled back like a warrior's helm, eyes sharp as truth, draped in a blood-red blazer that made no apologies. She was not just a congresswoman, she was a movement, a generation's fury, and a firepower of facts dressed in lipstick and logic. Across from her, John Kennedy, the senior senator from Louisiana, the old guard in a gray suit, folksy on the outside, calculating on the inside. He smiled that smile, the kind that hides 1,000 filibusters, the kind that says, I've been here longer than your lifetime. But tonight, time would mean nothing, because the country wasn't watching a debate, it was watching a reckoning. Anderson Cooper stepped forward, voice neutral, posture steady, but he knew he wasn't here to mediate, he was here to witness history. Tonight's topic was energy, but the real subject was power. Who had it, who abused it, and who was ready to take it back? Cooper's first question cut to the bone. Congresswoman, your Green New Deal has been called radical, unrealistic, too costly, too fast, too much. How do you respond? AOC didn't blink. She leaned in, not with anger, but with precision. Anderson, the real question is, can we afford not to act? Because while senators count costs, my district counts caskets. While oil execs cash bonuses, my people inhale asthma and drown in floods named after the climate they ignored. She paused, not for drama, but to let the truth breathe. We're not just cutting carbon, we're building futures. We're not killing jobs, we're creating millions. This isn't about theory, it's about survival. Her voice didn't tremble, it surged. A quiet applause rose from parts of the crowd, the younger ones, the ones with student loans and solar panels, the ones who knew she wasn't selling hope, she was issuing a deadline. Cooper turned to Kennedy, Senator. Your response? Kennedy adjusted his glasses, grinned that rehearsed grin, and began the dance. Well, Anderson, I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion, but let's talk real life. Where I come from, energy means jobs. Oil and gas put food on the table, not hashtags. You can't just flip a switch and expect solar panels to build themselves. We need a bridge, not a leap into the unknown. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if reason wore cowboy boots, and part of the audience nodded, the ones clinging to what they knew, even if it was sinking. But AOC didn't wait long. She struck back, not with heat, but with ice, Senator. That kind of thinking is exactly why we're still stuck. While the planet burns, you speak of bridges, but what you're building is a cliff, and you expect the working class to jump blindfolded. We're not talking handouts, we're talking reinvestment, retraining, reclaiming dignity through clean energy. The crowd stirred, louder now. Kennedy sat still, but his smile shrank. He replied slowly, carefully, as if balancing on a ledge. Congresswoman, I've seen a lot of blueprints in my time. They all look pretty, until the ink runs dry. Try telling a rig worker who's been offshore for 30 years that he's getting a coding boot camp. He doesn't want your app, he wants his life back. That struck. Not with truth, but with nostalgia. And nostalgia is a drug. Easy to sell, hard to survive. AOC's lips tightened, but her voice did not. Senator, this isn't about dreams, it's about deadlines. If we don't move, the world moves. Without us. And it's not just his job on the line, it's his grandkids' air, his wife's water, his home's foundation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because facts shouted louder than sentiment. And for the first 15 minutes, America watched. Not a debate, but a duel. Her urgency, his restraint, her clarity, his comfort. She brought the fire of the future. He clung to the ashes of the past, but the tension was about to snap, because policy could only hide pain for so long. And Cooper's next question would peel away the surface and show the cost of standing still. Anderson Cooper didn't flinch. His voice dropped half a tone, but the question struck with full force. Senator, Congresswoman, critics say, these debates ignore the people caught in the crossfire. The single mother who loses her refinery job, the family washed out by a flood. How does your plan speak to them? Silence followed, but it didn't last. AOC took it first, and she didn't hesitate. That's exactly who I fight for, she said. Her voice sharpened, her words now a blade, because climate doesn't hit Wall Street. It hits the Bronx, it hits Shreveport, it hits the front porches of families that never got bailed out. My plan prioritizes those communities, not just with slogans, but with dollars. Real investments in solar, wind, and jobs where they're needed most. not where lobbyists say they should go. This isn't a tech utopia. This is justice, and it's long overdue. The crowd roared, not just applause, but release, because in those words they saw not policy, but possibility. But Kennedy tilted his head, slowly, as if he'd seen this movie before. Justice is a fine word, he said, but it don't pay rent. It don't fill a lunchbox. It don't warm a house when the furnace breaks. You want to talk about the Bronx? Fine, but let's not forget that single mom in Shreveport who can't afford to wait for your grand plan to kick in. What she needs isn't a promise, it's a paycheck, the crowd murmured. The tension turning AOC leaned forward, now colder, now cutting Senator. I'm not here to make people comfortable, I'm here to keep them alive. Because hurricanes don't ask for your zip code, wildfires don't wait for legislation. You say we need to wait, but the planet won't. Every delay is a betrayal, and the people who suffer most are the ones you keep asking to wait. The room shook, not physically, but ideologically. Kennedy's smile faded, his voice now firmer, but slower. I don't disagree. We need to act. But action that kills jobs isn't action, it's ideology. I've walked those towns, and let me tell you folks, they don't need lectures, they need lifelines. The crowd clapped, but AOC didn't blink, because she wasn't finished. You call it ideology, she said. I call it reality, because the reality is those jobs aren't permanent, those industries aren't invincible, and if we don't lead this transition, other countries will, and we'll be stuck, clinging to rust, while they cash in on the future. She leaned back, but her words stayed forward. This isn't about abandoning workers. It's about refusing to abandon the planet. The applause thundered, louder now, because this wasn't rhetoric anymore. It was reckoning. Kennedy exhaled, just once, then stared across the table. Then maybe, he said, it's time we stop pretending we can have both. Because I've seen too many folks fall through the cracks of promises just like yours. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable now, but AOC leaned in, her voice now quieter, more lethal. Then maybe it's time some folks stepped aside and let a new generation lead. A gasp ran through the room, not because of the words, but because of the line they crossed. Kennedy stiffened, eyes narrowing, but AOC didn't let up. She stared him down and dropped the phrase, that split the night in two. Sit down, boy. It was soft, but it detonated like thunder. Time froze, even the cameras hesitated. Anderson Cooper blinked, his pen midair, his lips parted but silent. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or recoil, and somewhere in the CNN control room, a producer whispered, "Keep the cameras rolling." Because that wasn't a quip, it was a declaration. It wasn't disrespect, it was a generational shift with teeth. But Kennedy didn't shout, didn't snarl, didn't storm. He tilted his head, hands folded, calmly, and just stared. As if watching her walk into her own trap. Anderson tried to recover. "Senator, would you like to respond?" But Kennedy didn't need permission. He leaned forward, voice soft but cold as steel. "Congresswoman, I've been called a lot of things, but that's a new one." A few nervous chuckles, but no comfort, because his next words were aimed with surgical precision. Leadership isn't who shouts loudest or who goes viral, it's who shows up, listens, and delivers. I'm not here to trade insults. I'm here to protect the folks who keep this country alive. You want to call me boy? Fine. But I'll stand while you talk about dreams. Because someone's got to keep the lights on. The crowd burst, some for his restraint, some for his grit. AOC sat still, but the smirk was gone, replaced by a fire not yet spent, because she knew the fight was just beginning. And as the night deepened, so did the lines, not just between two politicians, but between two visions of America. One rooted in tradition, one reaching for transformation, and neither side was done, not by a long shot. The silence still lingered, heavy as smoke, after AOC dropped the line, "Sit down, boy." And though Kennedy had returned fire with calm precision, the studio knew this wasn't over, not by a mile. The crowd buzzed, divided, the old power clinging to etiquette, the new power demanding disruption. But Anderson Cooper leaned back in, like a referee in a bout gone personal. "Senator Kennedy, let's return to the topic. Energy policy for states like Louisiana, where oil and gas are the backbone." Kennedy took the bait, but he wasn't done with the cut. He adjusted his glasses, his smile barely visible, but his voice still sharp. "Anderson, I'm glad to talk policy, because that's what folks back home care about. Not viral moments, not hashtags. They want to know how they're going to keep the lights on, how they're going to feed their kids. And before I dive in, let me say this. When someone throws insults instead of ideas, it usually means they've run out of both." The crowd chuckled, but it wasn't joy, it was tension dressed up as laughter. Kennedy pressed on. "Let's talk numbers. Louisiana's got 190. Zero jobs tied to oil and gas. That's not just stats, that's real folks. Welders, truck drivers, rig workers, the people who break their backs. So this country can run, and you want to replace that with windmills and promises. Well, I'm all for clean energy. But you can't replace an engine mid-flight. You need a plan, not a prayer. Applause erupted, especially from the older crowd, the ones who still trusted boots more than algorithms. But AOC was unshaken. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table. Her eyes never left him. She waited, let the applause fade. Then she spoke. Senator, let's be honest. Oil and gas didn't build America alone, but they did build pollution, asthma, cancer zones, hurricanes that don't care about state lines. You say 190. Zero jobs. But how many hospital beds? How many flooded homes? How many funeral costs did that buy us? You talk about rig workers. I talk about their grandkids, breathing smog, drinking tainted water, wondering why Washington can't grow up. And your plan isn't a bridge, it's a delay. And delay is death. She didn't raise her voice, she just refused to lower her truth. The crowd applauded. More now young faces, marginalized voices. The ones who lived where Kennedy's numbers became cancer rates. Kennedy nodded, almost like he was listening, but his smile told another story. Congresswoman, let me tell you about Marcus. He's a welder, Lake Charles. Been working offshore rigs for 25 years. 3 kids, mortgage, no Twitter account. He doesn't care about solar farms in the Bronx. He cares about making it to payday. You talk about retraining, but who pays his bills while he waits? How does your Green New Deal help Marcus next month? The crowd stirred, not with cheers, but with discomfort, because that question had weight. AOC didn't blink. Marcus deserves better, she said. Not pity, not poison, better. And my plan offers $10 billion in workforce development, local hiring for clean energy, infrastructure, that built in Lake Charles. Not over it. He doesn't need charity, he needs vision. Oil and gas are not the future. They're the past, wearing a tie. And if we don't lead, we'll be following countries that already left us behind. Kennedy's eyes flashed, but he kept his voice smooth. Congresswoman, your numbers are generous, your ambition admirable, but the Government Accountability Office says most retraining programs fail 60% of the time. That means 6 out of 10 Marcuses get left behind. While Washington pats itself on the back, that's not leadership, that's roulette. The crowd clapped. This time, firmer. Kennedy's facts struck hard, because numbers don't flinch. But AOC leaned in, her tone now cooler, sharper. And yet, you defend an industry that gets billions in subsidies. While Marcus scrapes by, you talk about risk, but you ignore the risk of standing still, of doing nothing. While the storms get stronger, the droughts longer, the lives shorter. The real gamble is your comfort with collapse. The audience shifted, some clapped, others paused. The room was now split between fear of change and fear of inaction, and AOC saw the opening. You don't want a Green New Deal because it threatens the order you're used to. But the old order, built off carbon, built off cancer, built off inequality, it's collapsing, with or without your permission. So we have a choice, lead or get left. Kennedy opened his mouth, but Cooper raised a hand. Let's pause right there, he said, eyes darting between them, because even he knew this wasn't just a debate, it was a turning point. AOC sat back, but her fire never dimmed. She had come not to play, but to pivot the entire frame. And Kennedy, though clever, was beginning to realize that the future wasn't asking for permission. It was demanding the mic. The applause faded, but the tremor remained. Kennedy adjusted his tie, but not his stance. He looked at AOC with a smile that masked urgency and a tone that tried to sound patient. Congresswoman, let's be real. We've got data from the Energy Information Administration saying oil and gas still power 60% of this country. Renewables, just 12. That's not transition, that's fantasy. You say we'll close that gap by 2030, but even with all your enthusiasm, that's a long way from real. And the folks I talk to don't want to be lab rats. In your energy experiment, a few chuckles erupted from his side of the room. The ones who still trusted spreadsheets over storms. But AOC didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink. Instead, she leaned forward, as if pulling the debate closer to her grip. Senator, you love your numbers, but let me give you one. $27 billion. That's what climate disasters cost America last year alone. Floods, fires, storms that tore through red and blue states alike. We're not preparing for a hypothetical, we're cleaning up your reality. You say 60% is oil and gas. I say 60% is what's killing us. And the longer we wait, the higher the bill. Her voice was steady, but her silence afterward spoke louder. Kennedy forced a smile, but his reply was tighter. You want to talk cost? Fine, your plan, according to the American Action Forum, could cost $50 to $90 trillion over a decade. That's not reform, that's national bankruptcy. You say you'll tax the rich, close loopholes, and magic will happen. But folks in Baton Rouge don't see a unicorn. They see pink slips. The crowd clapped, louder this time, because fear speaks fluent economics. But AOC was already. Get ahead, Senator. Let's break that down. That 90 trillion is a scare number, inflated by the same think tanks. That said, tobacco was fine, and the Iraq War would pay for itself. Independent studies put it closer to 50, and that includes savings from avoiding climate catastrophe, from lowering health costs, from stabilizing our grid. You call it expensive, I call it responsible, because betting on fossil fuels isn't just costly, it's suicidal. Applause again, this time sharper, more focused. Kennedy blinked, just once, but it was enough. AOC pressed on. You talk about certainty, but there's nothing certain about rising seas, burning forests, and collapsing supply chains. You call it idealism, but it's physics, and physics doesn't care about your politics. Kennedy tried to interrupt, but AOC didn't yield. And let's talk values. You say you defend the working class, but your policies protect profit, not people. The same oil companies you defend get billions in subsidies, while workers like Marcus get laid off, or worse, sent back in with no protection and no health care. You want to talk about justice? Let's start with truth. Her voice now sliced, each word another incision. Kennedy exhaled, but the oxygen was thinner now. He tried to push back, voice low, but forceful. I value the men and women who keep this country powered, the ones who drill refined transport, not CEOs' workers. And when Washington plays God, shutting them down without parachute, that's not justice, that's elitism. The crowd erupted, but not all of it, because the line between populism and evasion was beginning to show. AOC didn't flinch. Then why do you ignore them? When their lungs burn, when their kids get sick, when their homes flood, you want to defend them, then defend their future, not just their paycheck, because the paycheck means nothing. If the town is underwater, the room shifted again, this time toward her, because truth, even uncomfortable truth, carries a weight that applause can't always balance. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice quiet, but with a tinge of resentment. So what do you tell Marcus? When the rig shuts down and your retraining center's still being built, you going to send him a tweet? The line landed, but not the way he hoped. AOC smiled, cold controlled. No, I'll send him a job, and I'll send him home. To a community with clean water, stable power, and a future that doesn't run on extinction. You talk about what's not ready. I talk about what's not acceptable. The crowd stood. Not all, but enough to mark a shift. Kennedy looked, and for the first time he didn't speak, because somewhere between his numbers and her fury, the debate had changed shape. Was no longer about energy, it was about consequence. And in that space, only one voice was speaking for tomorrow. The lights didn't dim, but the temperature dropped. Because when AOC smiled after Kennedy's last jab, it wasn't warmth, it was the calm before the collapse. Anderson Cooper leaned in, attempting to steer the chaos back to policy. Let's move to solutions, specifics. Congresswoman, you first. AOC didn't hesitate, and she didn't waste a single syllable. Anderson, the Green New Deal isn't just a slogan, it's a blueprint. We're talking solar farms in low-income communities, union jobs that rebuild bridges and weatherize schools, carbon-neutral infrastructure in places like Flint, the Bronx, and yes, Louisiana. We're building a future, not on theory, but on equity. Every child deserves breathable air, drinkable water, and